The slap echoed across the silent parade deck like a gunshot, instantly freezing 60 terrified recruits in their boots. Drill Sergeant Thorne smirked, believing he had finally broken the defiant female private who refused to cry. He didn't know that the red mark blooming on her cheek had just summoned 4 of the most dangerous officers in the army and signed his own discharge papers. The humid air of Fort Jackson hung heavy over the training grounds, thick with the smell of pine needles, sweat, and fear. For the 60 recruits of Bravo Company, fear had a face, and it belonged to Senior Drill Sergeant Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a man who didn't just train soldiers, he dismantled human beings. He was a towering figure of corded muscle and malice, known for pushing recruits past their breaking points, not to make them stronger, but to feed his own ego. He thrived on tears, panic, and submission. If a recruit showed weakness, he devoured them. If they showed strength, he hated them even more. And no one had shown more quiet, infuriating strength than Private Elena Cross. Elena was small, standing only 5'4", with a frame that looked like a strong wind might knock her over. But she was made of iron wire, flexible but impossible to snap. While other recruits wept in their bunks or collapsed during the 10-mile rucks, Eleanor simply adjusted her pack and kept moving. Her face remained a mask of calm determination that seemed to drive Sergeant Thorne insane. "You think you're better than this platoon, Private Cross?" Thorne would scream, his brim shouting inches from her nose, spittle flying onto her face. "No, Drill Sergeant," she would reply, her voice steady, eyes locked forward. "Then why aren't you suffering like the rest of these maggots? Do you think this is a game?" "No, Drill Sergeant, I am here to train." Her lack of fear was an insult to him. Over the first 6 weeks, Thorne made her his personal project. He gave her double watch shifts. He dumped her footlocker contents into the mud 3 nights in a row. He made her hold a rifle over her head until her arms trembled violently, waiting for her to drop it. She never did. It was Week 7 Combatives Week, when the tension finally reached its boiling point. The platoon was gathered in the sandpit, practicing hand-to-hand combat drills. The sun was beating down, turning the sand into a frying pan. The recruits were exhausted, bruised, and filthy. Thorne was prowling the circle, looking for a victim. He stopped in front of Elena, who was paired with a hulking recruit named Private Miller from Iowa. Miller was twice her size, but Elena had just successfully executed a hip toss, putting the larger man into the dirt with technical precision. Thorne's eyes narrowed. He didn't see skill. He saw defiance. He stepped into the ring, kicking sand onto Miller to get him up. "Get out of there, Miller," Thorne growled. "You move like a pregnant cow. If you can't handle a little girl, I guess I have to show you how it's done." The platoon went deadly silent. Drill sergeants were supposed to instruct, not spar full force, with exhausted recruits, certainly not across gender lines in a grappling drill meant for technique. "Drill Sergeant," Eleanor asked, her stance relaxing slightly. "Are we demonstrating a technique? We are demonstrating reality, Private Cross," Thorne sneered, unbuttoning his blouse cuffs. "In the real world, the enemy doesn't care if you're 5'0". Put your guard up." Eleanor hesitated. She looked at the other drill sergeants on the perimeter. Sergeant Willis and Sergeant Baker looked uncomfortable shifting their weight, but neither dared to intervene. Thorne was the senior drill sergeant. His word was law in the pit. "I said guard up," Thorne roared. Elena raised her hands. She didn't want this fight. She knew something Thorne didn't. Something she had kept hidden in her file, buried under redacted lines and standard entry paperwork. She wasn't just a random recruit from Ohio. She had grown up in dojos and on bases learning to fight before she learned to ride a bike. But she couldn't show that skill now. She had to play the part of the recruit. Thorn lunged. It wasn't a training move. It was a brawl. He threw a heavy shove that sent Elena stumbling back into the loose sand. She recovered, circling away. "Stop running!" Thorn yelled. He pursued her, swinging wild, aggressive hooks meant to intimidate. Elena slipped one punch, then another, moving with a fluidity that only enraged him further. "Fight back!" he screamed. "Drill Sergeant, this isn't protocol!" she shouted, blocking a strike that rattled her forearms. "I am the protocol!" Thorn feinted left, and then losing all professional control, swung a backhand with the full weight of his body behind it. He wasn't aiming for her guard. He was aiming for her face. The sound of the impact was sickening. It wasn't the dull thud of a gloved hand. It was the sharp crack of bare knuckles against bone. Thorn's hand connected squarely with Elena's cheekbone. The force of the blow lifted her off her feet. She spun in the air and crashed hard into the sand, rolling once before coming to a stop. Her patrol cap flew off, landing in the dust. Total silence descended on the training pit. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. The other recruits stared in horror. Sergeant Willis took a step forward, his face pale. "Thorn, what the hell are you doing?" Thorn stood over her, breathing heavy, his chest heaving. For a second, he looked shocked at his own action, but then his ego clamped down. He couldn't show regret, not in front of the privates. "She refused to engage," Thorn barked, justifying the assault to the silent crowd. "She dropped her guard." "That gets you killed in combat. Get up, Private." Elena lay in the sand for a long moment. She tasted copper. Blood was trickling from a cut on her lip, and the left side of her face was already swelling, throbbing with a heat that radiated through her skull. Slowly, terrifyingly, calmly, Elena placed her hands in the sand and pushed herself up. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't look at the other recruits. She stood up, brushed the sand from her knees, and retrieved her patrol cap. She placed it back on her head, adjusting the brim with meticulous care. Then she looked at Thorn. There was no fear in her eyes anymore. The look she gave him was devoid of emotion, cold and clinical, like a judge looking at a convicted murderer. She reached into her pocket, a violation of protocol on the drill field, and pulled out a small laminating card. No, it was a watch, an old-fashioned analog watch. She checked the time. "You have made a grave error, Drill Sergeant," she said softly. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the silence it carried to everyone. Thorn laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "Are you threatening me, Private? I'll have you court-martialed for insubordination. Drop and give me—" "No," Elena said. She didn't shout, but the word stopped him dead. "Excuse me." Thorn stepped closer, raising his hand again. "I said no," Elena repeated. She turned to Sergeant Willis, who was rushing over. "Sergeant Willis, please log the time. 14:00 hours, assault on a subordinate. Witnesses present, platoon Bravo." "You little—" Thorn lunged for her again, but this time Sergeant Willis stepped in between them, putting a hand on Thorn's chest. "Back off, Marcus," Willis warned, his voice low. "You crossed the line, way over the line. She needs to learn respect." "She's not the one who needs to learn," Elena said, wiping the blood from her lip. She looked toward the main road that ran parallel to the training grounds. "They should be here in 3 minutes." "Who?" Thorn scoffed. "Your mummy." Eleanor looked him dead in the eye. My godfathers. Before Thorn could make a joke, the low rumble of engines cut through the air. It wasn't the usual sound of transport trucks. It was the deep, aggressive growl of high-performance engines. 2 black government SUVs, flanked by a military police cruiser, tore around the corner of the range road, kicking up a cloud of dust. They didn't slow down for the speed limit signs. They roared directly onto the grass, bypassing the parking lot, and screeched to a halt right at the edge of the sandpit. Thorn's smirk faltered. What is this? The doors of the SUVs opened in unison. 4 men stepped out. They weren't MPs. They were older, their uniforms immaculate, their bearing radiating absolute authority. And on their shoulders, the sunlight glinted off silver eagles. 4 full-bird colonels. They didn't look like administrators. They looked like warriors who had simply put on dress uniforms. They moved with a predatory grace, ignoring everyone else, and marching straight toward the sandpit. The leader of the group, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow and eyes like chipped flint, spotted Eleanor. He saw the blood on her lip. He saw the swelling on her cheek. The temperature on the drill field seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Attention on deck!" Sergeant Willis screamed, his voice cracking. The platoon snapped to attention so fast, the sound was like a thunderclap. Thorn stood, frozen. He knew ranks. He knew chains of command. But seeing 4 colonels appear out of thin air on a basic training range was impossible. The lead officer, Colonel James Ironhead Briggs, walked straight past Thorn, as if he didn't exist. He stopped in front of Elena. He didn't salute her. She was a private, after all. But the way he looked at her was filled with a terrifying mix of paternal concern and volcanic rage. "Report, Private Cross," Colonel Briggs said, his voice a low rumble. Eleanor stood at attention. "Drill Sergeant Thorn struck me during a training demonstration, sir. Closed fist. Intentional strike to the face while my guard was down per his instruction." Briggs turned slowly. The other 3 colonels. Colonel Vance, no relation to the drill sergeant, Colonel Sterling and Colonel Halloway, fanned out, encircling Thorn. They were men from the 75th Ranger Regiment and Special Forces Command. They were legends in the community, men whose names were whispered in mess halls. Thorn began to sweat. "Sir Colonel, I was conducting a standard combatives—" "Silence," Colonel Sterling said. He didn't shout. He just whispered the word, and it hit harder than a pun. "You will speak when you are spoken to, Sergeant." Briggs stepped up to Thorn. Briggs was an inch shorter than the drill sergeant, but he loomed over him like a skyscraper. "You hit her. It was training, sir. She was being defiant. I was teaching her." "You hit her," Briggs repeated, pointing a finger at Elena. "Do you know who that soldier is?" "Private Cross, sir. A recruit." "That," Briggs said, his voice trembling with suppressed violence, "is the daughter of General Marcus Cross." The color drained from Thorn's face so fast he looked like a corpse. General Marcus Cross. The name was wholly writ in the infantry. A Medal of Honor recipient, a man who had led men through the worst hells on earth, revered by every soldier who wore a uniform. He had passed away 6 months ago from cancer. "General Cross asked us to do one thing before he died," Colonel Halloway said, stepping in from the left. "He asked us to let his daughter make her own way, to let her earn her title without special treatment. That is why she enlisted as a private. That is why she is here anonymously." "But," Colonel Briggs continued, leaning into Thorn's face, "he also asked us to watch, to ensure that the army he loved treated her with the dignity of a soldier. He made us promise that if anyone dishonored the uniform by abusing his child, we would handle it. Thorne swallowed hard. Sir, I didn't know. If I had known, that makes it worse. Elena spoke up from behind them. The colonels turned to her. If you had known, you wouldn't have done it, Elena said, her voice steady, which means you felt comfortable abusing a private because you thought she was a nobody. You thought she had no one to speak for her. That is why you are unfit to wear that hat. Briggs looked back at Thorne. The look of disgust on the colonel's face was total. MP! Briggs shouted. The MPs who had arrived with the convoy sprinted forward. Take this man into custody, Briggs ordered. Charge him with assault on a subordinate, conduct unbecoming, and maltreatment of a recruit, and get those stripes off his chest before I rip them off myself. Sir, please, Thorne begged, panic setting in. It was one mistake. I have 15 years in. You had 15 years, Colonel Sterling corrected. Now you have a court-martial. As the MPs grabbed Thorne, twisting his arms behind his back, he looked frantically at the recruits, hoping for someone to vouch for him. But 60 pairs of eyes watched him with cold satisfaction. Private Miller. The farm boy from Iowa actually cracked a smile. Wait, Colonel Briggs said. The MPs paused. Briggs turned to Elena. Private Cross, do you wish to press full charges? It will mean testifying. It will mean your identity is revealed. You won't be just a recruit anymore. Elena touched her swollen cheek. She looked at the man who had tormented her platoon for 7 weeks. He didn't just hit me, sir, Elena said. He's been terrorizing this platoon for months. He is a bully, and bullies don't belong in my father's army. She straightened her back. I press charges. I want him gone. Done, Briggs said. Get him out of my sight. Thorne was not just escorted away. He was dismantled. As the MPs twisted his arms behind his back, the terrifying illusion of his invincibility shattered instantly. The man who had been the god of Bravo Company, the man who held their careers and lives in his fist, was reduced to a stumbling, pleading mess. His boots dragged through the sand he had forced them to crawl through. The click of the handcuffs was loud, a sharp, metallic finality that cut through the humid afternoon air. You can't do this! I am a senior drill sergeant! Thorne shouted, his voice cracking with desperation as they shoved him toward the patrol car. I demand to speak to the JAG officer. This is a misunderstanding. Get in the car, Private, one of the MPs snapped, demoting him verbally before the paperwork was even filed. The door slammed shut, sealing him inside the cage, as the cruiser peeled away, followed by one of the black SUVs. A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the sandpit. The 60 recruits of Bravo Company stood frozen, their minds struggling to process the shift in reality. They looked from the retreating dust cloud to the small, battered figure of Private Elena Cross, and then to the 3 remaining full-bird colonels, standing like statues of judgment in the center of the training ground. Colonel Briggs turned his back on the road and faced the platoon. His eyes swept over the terrified faces of the young soldiers. At ease, he commanded. The order was quiet, but it carried the weight of a mountain. The platoon relaxed their rigid stances, but no one dared to speak. All eyes were glued to Elena. Briggs walked over to her, his stiff military bearing softening just a fraction as he closed the distance. He reached into his dress uniform pocket and pulled out a pristine white handkerchief. He offered it to her, his eyes scanning the darkening bruise that was spreading across her cheekbone. You okay, Elle? Briggs asked. His voice had dropped the command tone, replaced by the gruff, worried timbre of a family member. Elena accepted the cloth, pressing it gently to her split lip. She winced, the adrenaline fading enough to let the pain seep in. "I'm fine, Uncle Jim," she whispered, keeping her voice low enough that only the front row could hear. "I told you. I didn't want a rescue mission unless it was life or death." "He struck you with a closed fist, Elena," Briggs replied, his jaw tightening as he looked at the spot where Thorne had stood. "That is life or death. Your father. If Marcus were here, he wouldn't have just arrested him. He would have buried him under the parade deck." "I had him handled," she murmured, though a ghost of a smile touched her eyes. "I know you did. You're a cross. You could have dismantled his knee before he finished the swing." Briggs chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "But you took the hit. You let him expose himself to save the rest of these kids from his tyranny. That is what your father would have called command presence." Briggs straightened up and turned to the remaining cadre. The other drill sergeants, Willis and Baker, looked ready to pass out. They had just watched their boss get arrested by Special Forces colonels for assaulting a general's daughter. They were terrified that the axe was about to swing toward them. "Who is the next senior-ranking NCO?" Briggs barked. Sergeant Willis stepped forward, snapping a salute so sharp his hand vibrated. "I am Sir Staff Sergeant Willis." "Congratulations, Senior Drill Sergeant Willis. This is your platoon, now," Briggs announced, his voice carrying to the back of the formation. "You have a mess to clean up. You are going to retrain these soldiers. You will build them up, not break them down for sport. And if I hear even a whisper of the kind of garbage Thorne was pulling, I will return, and I won't bring the MPs next time. Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," Willis shouted, sweating profusely. Briggs turned back to Elena, looking at her battered face with concern. "We need to file the official statements. It's going to be a bureaucracy nightmare. Grab your gear, Private. You're coming with us. We'll get you checked out at the officer's infirmary. Get you a meal that isn't MREs." It was the golden ticket. Every recruit dreamed of a way out of the heat, a way to escape the sand pit. Elena looked at the air-conditioned SUV waiting for her. Then she looked back at her platoon. She saw Private Miller, the farm boy from Iowa, looking at her with wide, reverent eyes. She saw the others who had been beaten down by Thorne for weeks now, standing a little taller because she had stood up for them. If she left now, she was the general's daughter. If she stayed, she was their squad mate. Elena handed the bloody handkerchief back to Colonel Briggs. "No, sir," she said clearly. Briggs raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me. I'm in the middle of training, sir," Elena said, adjusting her patrol cap and pulling the brim low over her eyes. "I haven't finished my combatives rotation. If I leave now, I miss the block of instruction. I'll finish the day with my platoon." Briggs stared at her for a long moment. Then a look of immense pride washed over his scarred face. It was the same look her father used to give her when she won a sparring match against boys twice her age. "Who are?" "Private." Briggs nodded. "Carry on." He signaled to the other colonels. Without another word, they marched back to the SUVs, their presence vanishing as quickly as it had arrived. As the engines roared and the vehicles disappeared, the platoon was left alone with Sergeant Willis. The silence this time was different. It wasn't fearful. It was electric. Sergeant Willis stepped into the center of the ring. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, realizing that the quiet girl in the back row had more political power than the base commander. Yet she chose to stand in the dirt with them. "All right," Willis said, his voice finding a new professional rhythm. "You heard the private. We are in the middle of training. Miller, get back in the ring with Cross. Technical sparring only. No heavy contact. Begin." Elena stepped back into the circle. Her face throbbed with every heartbeat, but her hands came up in a perfect defensive posture. Miller hesitated. "You sure cross, you're bleeding." "I'm fine, Miller," she said, locking eyes with him. "Guard up. Let's work." As they resumed the drill, the atmosphere of Bravo Company changed forever. They weren't just terrified recruits anymore. They were a unit forged by the sight of true justice. Drill Sergeant Thorne was never seen at Fort Jackson again. The court-martial was swift and brutal. He was dishonorably discharged, stripped of all rank and benefits, his career ended by his own arrogance. Private Elena Cross, however, did not fade away. She refused all special treatment, completing every ruck march and every qualification with top scores. 10 weeks later on graduation day, she walked across the parade deck as the Distinguished Honor graduate. And in the front row of the VIP section, 4 hardened colonels stood at attention, rendering a slow, crisp salute not to a general's daughter, but to the private who had proven she was the toughest soldier on the field. That day, Drill Sergeant Thorne learned the hard way that you never know who you're dealing with, and that true strength is quiet, disciplined, and patient. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of instant karma and military drama. Thanks for watching.